welcome back everybody to the TLDCast playlist on virtual instructor-led classrooms. We're getting ready for session number 3. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you all got yourself a sandwich or an extra cup of coffee, or maybe you're over on UK time and it's happy hour. I'm happy you're still hanging with us. It's all good. Good to see so many people hanging out with us. An interesting virtual instructor-led classroom. This is such cool stuff. We all need to know how to do this. Oh, I'm sorry. You guys are getting some echo, huh? Well, we'll figure that out. It'll be all right. The echo, she's got headphones. There's no way that there's echo going on. We're all good. And hey, in that other video hot seat today, we have Cynthia Clay. Hi, Cynthia. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good to see you too. Boy, you're the third person in our virtual instructor-led training session. We've had 2 great sessions so far. And let me just start by dropping into the chat and just doing what we did the last time and just refreshing everybody's memory. What did you learn from Joe, everybody? Those of you that were hanging around, drop in a couple real key learnings that you got. Sarah says activities and engagements can work in virtual ILT. Helena says how to set up a design document for webinar training. Loads of activities. Marco just thinks Joe is super awesome. And yes, that does count. Thank you, Marco. Yeah, interaction every 2 minutes, 2 to 4 minutes, I believe was the basic range we were talking. It seems to be the standard that everybody's pushing for. Interactions are key to engagement, but don't let it become the next button. Thanks, Alan. Yes, that's an excellent point to remember. Alex, that doesn't count, but I appreciate it. Well, here we are for part 3. Ladies and gentlemen, Cynthia Clay. Cynthia, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody, since not everybody probably knows who you are.
No.
I keep thinking too. I'm like, just in case somebody here doesn't know you, give them the Reader's Digest version.
Hey, I am the founder and the CEO of NetSpeed Learning Solutions in Seattle, Washington. And we work with clients that are transitioning to the virtual workplace. We support their leaders to become more effective in these environments, and we support trainers and instructional designers to become more effective. So that's us.
Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. And today we're going to be talking about just making a few key points around why some of these engaging activities and why this interactivity is so important, especially in the virtual classroom, from a sort of brain-based principles approach, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My approach to this really is understanding now you guys are not included in this statement, of course, but what many people are doing out there with the delivery of webinars is so ineffective because our brains are not wired to learn the way people often present. So I thought maybe we would talk about 4 engagement and retention principles that are tied to the neuroscience of learning. So, and like every speaker you've got here today, we're all passionate about this, right? We just want this to be better than it often is. And you're here because you probably feel the same way. So. Yeah,
absolutely. And I just want to expand upon that just a little bit and just, explain to everybody how we weave all this together, right? So we know interactivity is important. We talked about it with Cassie and we talked about it with Joe, and we've got some great ideas and we've got a great design document, but understanding why all of these things are important. Sometimes we just go rushing into this stuff without really getting that sort of foundational knowledge. So that's what we're going to cover next and talk about just a few of the elements and the aspects of why it is that this is so important for the virtual classroom. So let's just kick it off. What's number one?
Well, and I actually brought a slide deck.
Oh, that's great. So, get those up for us.
Yeah. So if we could look at that first slide, and I'll just try and direct you here a little bit because I had a little trouble displaying my own deck today. So I'm relying on Brent to display this. Let's go to the next one.
Alrighty.
That's just us right there. So what we know, you look at this in a picture like this and you go, oh yeah, that's how we learn. We learn it, we encode it, we recall it, we apply it. And any good instructional designer is designing in such a way that this process happens. So this process maps with the way our brains take in information and what our brains need to be able to move information to long-term memory and then integrate it into our skill sets. So if you go to the next slide, I thought today what I might do is pick out two brain-based principles for engagement. So I've been doing all this research on the neuroscience of learning, and there's 6 principles for engagement, and in a second you'll see 6 principles for retention. But I thought we might here we go. Here's 6 more. If you want to click.
Want this one?
Well, that's fine. You got to click them in though because I animated it.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you can see our retention principles. So there's 12. We're not going to talk about 12 principles, but I thought maybe we might talk about 2 for engagement to start. So if you move forward, the very first one I wanted to talk about and get you guys involved with this too is neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you want to just chat about that for a second, what the heck does that mean? People have been saying that for a decade. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So yeah, what does it mean? Neurons that fire together, wire together. Yeah, whatever is happening in there, learning sticks because things are wiring together. Thanks, light bulb Joe. Yeah. So we got to help people build mental connections. And it's really interesting to start to think of yourself that way, Keith, to think of yourself as somebody who helps learners build mental connections, right? Yeah, I think mental's better than menial. Yeah. I sort of think of this as the more neural pathways I can create with what I'm doing and explaining and showing and demonstrating and engaging and interacting with you, the more you're going to be able to remember it because you're going to have, yeah, we do. We rebuild our brains by learning, Alan. Absolutely. So this really says that one of the things we have to do, and aha moments are part of it, Alex. I think so. Yeah. So we know that lots of neural pathways get formed as we learn. Our brains are pretty adaptive. We now know that the work on neuroplasticity really shows us that the very act of learning changes the wiring of the brain. So if you go to the next slide, these are the things that really stand out for me when I'm going into the virtual classroom. And I have to say, you might look at that and say, well, yes, that's true anywhere, any kind of training you might do. But I think what happens when we move into environments like this and web conferencing and virtual conferencing is we forget this, right? So the very first bullet point says that we've got to increase multimodal sensory learning. And I don't know about you, but when you go to a really bad web conference experience, web training experience, I doubt that there's multimodal sensory learning going on. You're probably just sitting there, watching this thing happen. Yeah. Well, and so part of why I'm not saying learning styles is because much of what we used to think about learning styles has been pretty thoroughly debunked. So we used to think that each of us had learning style preferences. Some of us were auditory learners, some of us were visual learners, some of us were kinesthetic learners. Did I miss any? I don't know if anybody was a
The
smelly learner.
learners.
A smelly
Yeah.
learner. Yeah. But the research really shows, nope, none of that's true. We don't have a learning style preference. There really is no such thing. What we do know is that all of us, work better when we have various modes of learning happening, multiple modes of learning happening, which is really what this is saying. So, yeah, you're right. You're with me. So, one of the things we have to do if we're thinking about neurons that fire together, wire together, is that we have to make sure we're always helping create context for our learners or helping them discover their own context. We have to make sure we're always linking it. That's why it's so important to link it to what they already know. And the fourth bullet there really is that stories and metaphors are important. And I find often when I go watch other people's virtual classrooms that they sometimes ditch stories and metaphors and it becomes sort of bullet point training. So like here's all the ironically we're looking at 4 bullet points, but that's not what's most important here. So if you go to the next slide, I want to tell you a story. And I want, when I tell this story in talks at conferences, I get up and walk around and I act out the whole thing. So here I am in my chair, not getting up and walking around. Yeah. So let me just tell you this little story. And what I'd like you to do is listen to the story and make some connections to the brain-based principles, neurons that fire together, wire together. Okay. So this is an elementary school teacher and she wanted to teach her kids how to read out loud. So if you know kids this age in elementary school, there's no periods, there's no punctuation. It's just like one big run-on sentence. They get to the end of the sentence and it just flows into the next sentence. And this teacher wanted to help them figure out, how do you read with reading dynamics? How do you make sense of what you're reading while you read it? And so she spent half an hour inside reading a passage with them, trying to drill this in. And finally, in frustration, she said, okay, that's it. Put your coats on. We're going outside. We're going to go out to the playground. And they made a circle out in the playground. And she had them carry that text with them and then walk in a circle as they read. And when they came to a period, she had them come to a complete stop. And then they would start to read again. And when they came to a comma, she'd have them pause and then keep walking. And when they came to an exclamation mark, she had them jump up and down with excitement, to emphasize that sentence. So this is really fun because what happened was after 15 minutes of that, they went back inside and she found they had made enormous improvement in how they read aloud with reading dynamics. So they were finally now stopping at those periods, pausing at the commas, using emphasis at the ends of sentences that had exclamation marks. So all I want you to do, if you would jump into that chat, is just talk a little bit about how that story demonstrates neurons that fire together, wire together. What happened there that help those kids learn how to read out loud?
I'm going to give people a chance to answer in the chat.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I like they interacted with the grammar. Yeah, they did, didn't they? Yeah, it was activity-based combined with cognitive. Yep. Hi, Christina. They had multiple parts of the brain working together. Yeah, they felt what they had to do. That's so cool. Yeah, because they're listening to it, they're saying it, they're saying it, listening, reading it, they're moving. And so it's a great example of why getting the entire body involved helps neurons wire together, right? So we get that all working together and our memory is enhanced, right? Our engagement is enhanced too. That was probably a lot more fun for them than sitting at a desk, reading. So I like that story because it both tells the story. It also gives you a chance to have context, and it has a chance for us to look at the learning supporting this brain-based principle. So That's my, I get all excited about this, as you can tell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it's
this
like,
is great.
woo.
It reminds me of a book that I've been listening to lately. I do a lot of audiobooks. It's called the guy who wrote the book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
I love his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Musicophilia.
Yeah.
And he was, they're talking about the neuroscience of music and listening to music. And oddly enough, he takes the approach of deficits and why certain people can't listen to music and because of injuries or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. And I've read other books that were similar, talking about the same things. And of all of the things that we learn to do throughout life, music is one of those that involves, especially when you're playing music, it's physical. You're looking, it's using all of your senses. And now they know when they look at somebody playing music and the MRI and you watch the brain, it's like the whole brain just lights up on music in all the different places.
Yeah.
And I always just found
Oliver
that to be so.
Sacks. Oliver Sacks. Thank you. Just like he's the author of The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. I was just sitting there going, what is that guy's name?
What is that guy's name? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great book because it really talks also about the fact that some of us have a real appreciation for music and some don't. And it's hardwired in your brain. And some brains are injured, were injured and suddenly they went from no appreciation of music to like being musical savants. And it's really fascinating. I'm seeing Learning Pirate, which by the way is really the best name I've ever seen. So yeah, so you take in information, the brain looks for related experience. Yeah. And memory is stored in more than one area of the brain, and it's doing a lot of cross-referencing in a short period of time. We're really helping with that cross-referencing process. Yes. Yeah. And trauma sometimes can create issues with our brains as well. And what we know about neuroplasticity now is based on what we've seen of brains rewiring around traumatically injured areas in the brain in order to continue to function. Yeah. Cool.
Good
I love your
stuff.
typos too. Yeah. So part of our job here is to figure this to figure this into the design process. What am I doing to help my learners have that experience of multiple sensory learning happening all the time? And it's not because people have different learning styles, it's because we all learn best that way. The second engagement principle that I thought we could talk about is from Brain Rules. That's a great book. If you don't know that book, Brain Rules by John Medina.
Yep,
And
my personal favorite.
Yeah, it really changed the way I do anything in the virtual classroom. But one thing he says is vision trumps all other senses. And so while we've debunked the whole idea of learning styles, vision is most people's dominant style. So it's like, let's contradict ourselves. That's the function that most of us.
But it's not a style,
it's
right?
Not a style.
You mentioned this before when we talked, right? And when we say things like this, and I just want to be clear for everybody in the chat. I don't want anybody walking away going, "Oh, everybody's talking styles again." And all that.
No, it's not style.
Yeah. So it's the sensory.
It's the sense that dominates. It's the one.
Yeah, the visual sense that dominates everything.
We take in the most information. It has the most impact. Yeah. And the reason I mention it today is that it is why your slides are so important. When you come into a virtual classroom experience. Yeah. So if you move forward to the next slide,
yep.
I made a purposely bad slide. No, I didn't. I made a good slide because I wanted to make this point. I forgot where I was, which is this is a visual medium. This kind of environment is a visual medium. And so we need to be capitalizing on that for the points that we're trying to make. Now go to my purposely bad slide. I actually hope this was kind of a captivating slide, but if you go to the next one, there you go. we see a lot of slides like this. Let's say I wanted to lecture you on marine debris, right? I want to tell you everything I know about marine debris, and here it all is right on this slide. And you can go ahead and rip that slide apart. Just have a good time. Like if you were looking at a slide like this.
I don't see any problem with it.
You don't. It's art junk. Yes. Lots of numbers. And Christina, not only are there a lot of them, but they're not really quite related to each other. So you got no way to link them together. Yeah.
It's hard to find the context, right? It's hard to figure out what the big piece is.
Yeah. Fish clip art. Yay. Yeah, it's word vomit.
Word vomit. Thank you, Nathan.
And there's Nemo. Now I'm totally distracted, right? Because Nemo's on my slide. So yeah. So coach me. If you were my virtual learning coach, yeah, put a picture of trash. Yep. Fish and clips. Alex, you are so funny. Yeah, maybe use a real photo. Yeah.
Should I forward?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sort of like this?
Yeah. And then you can go ahead and click in the key message. It's sort of painful. And so when you see something like that, you have a very different reaction. Yeah. Now, if you're in a session where you have to remember that there's 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic debris in the ocean, then I want to help you find a way to remember that as well. But just in terms of having an emotional impact, yeah, because this is a show it, don't tell it moment, because this is a visual medium. And it's too bad, somewhere in there must be a dead fish. Somewhere, but yeah. So I think that's the other engagement principle that I think is really important. Yeah, or even put some animals struggling to breathe. I mean, there's horrible images out there that I did not put in today. Yeah. Yes, there's an activity, find the dead fish. Christina. Oh my God. All right. So this is really calling on us to, not every one of your slides is going to look like that, but it's calling on us to spend a little more time developing PowerPoints that have that kind of emotional visual impact connected to our message. One other thing that John Medina says is that besides vision trumping all other senses, that is, if you want anybody to remember anything, you have to frame it with a story. And so oftentimes I'll use an image like that along with a story to really kind of connect you and kind of hit you in two ways, give you that story frame and also give you the visual impact that can hook you so that you hold on to that. All right. So the other thing I thought we might do is look at couple of brain-based principles for retention, because besides keeping them engaged in the virtual classroom, we want them to be able to remember it when they go back. Yeah. So I thought we might look at 2 principles for retention, and there's 6. So that we're going to look at mix it up and sleep on it. So I know you guys are going to have a lot to say about mix it up just based on what you've already been talking about in the chat. So if you move to the next slide, this principle really is about our brain's need to really be tricked, because we've all heard of the forgetting curve as if it's a bad thing, right? But the forgetting curve actually is a pretty good thing, because we're inundated with so much sensory stimulus that we rely on our hippocampus to go, not this, not this, not this, not this. Oh, that, because it's keeping us safe. It's making sure we're not overwhelmed. So mix it up really means that I think that was a speckled dinosaur egg, John. Mix it up really means you can bring all 4 of these in, that we've got to be thinking about novelty, variety, mixing, and spacing when we design. And I can recall when I first moved into the training field 10 years ago, my bank that I worked for had licensed a training program. And every module in that training program, it was for supervisor development, was developed exactly the same way. It was like there was always a story, there was always a behavior model, there was always a practice that happened at the end. The the videos were very similar from course to course, and it was boring to facilitate it. So you can imagine what it was like to experience it, and it worked against everything our brains need to be able to tune in, pay attention, and actually get benefit from what's happening, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I can stop blathering for a second if you want to just talk to me, Brent.
No, this is good. This is great. So the novelty, right? These are things that show in the spacing and the repetition of it that we all need to remember, right? Everybody needs to understand the novelty aspect, right? And variety. To your point, we don't pay attention to unimportant things. We don't pay attention to uninteresting things because our brain's sole purpose is to keep us alive. And it looks for those things that are different, that might not be so safe, and that might, endanger us. So we're kind of hardwired to look for the things that are interesting and strange. And I think I brought this up when you were on the last show, but I'm going to do it again just at a point of reference for everybody. So for those of you who were at TLDC 18 and saw the keynote from the CEO of Picmonic, who remembers the disease that he used a picture to help everybody remember?
Pickman something.
Niemann-Pick. Niemann-Pick disease. Yeah. So it was really interesting. He had a great graphic. It was mildly shocking. It was novel but it definitely drove the point home that if you have a novel looking sort of shocking picture and you have something visual to tie those most difficult words to that you're trying to memorize, that it's helpful. And it was a great experiment. So if anyone wants to know more, let me know.
I always think about the flight attendants, like for Southwest Airlines, that do those hilarious flight attendant announcements. And it's like, I finally pay attention. It's like, otherwise I'm like reading my book, and then all of a sudden they start making jokes and I'm there, I don't want to miss anything. And that's a kind of sneaky way to get you to pay attention to the flight announcement. We had an incident last week or 2 weeks ago where Southwest Flight had an engine problem. And I recall looking at pictures with people with their oxygen masks on wrong. I'm like, these are all the people that never paid attention to the flight announcement, right? And so they've got it down here instead of over their nose. And so that's kind of what's happening in our virtual classroom sometimes, right? We've got important stuff to say, but we haven't said it in such a way that people have actually heard it, right? So this is our call. Variety, you guys have been talking about interactivity and engagement, and basically all I would say with this is that you've got to be using every interaction tool at your disposal in creative and novel ways, right? So not getting stuck on just one or two that are your favorites. Mixing is an interesting one because it really it looks at where does long-term retention come from, and what we know is that while short-term learning may be slowed, long-term learning is enhanced when we mix. So there's a study that was done at Cal Poly about baseball players hitting fastballs, curveballs, and changeups, and they combined them into two groups and had one group learn through blocked practice. So they did 15 changeups, 15 fastballs, 15 curveballs, and the other group learned with interweaving. And the blocked group enjoyed it more, right? Because they had the sense of mastery while they were doing it. The interwoven group was more frustrated, but long term, the learning was better, longer, more effective for the interwoven group. And so sometimes we have to learning isn't always going to be easy. Sometimes we have to challenge people and make it harder. I think of learning two languages here as well, that and I intentionally put my kids when they were young into a preschool where all the teachers spoke Spanish all day. We don't speak Spanish at home, but I wanted them to become bilingual as much as possible, and I wanted them to be exposed to Spanish at the same time as English, so that they would have the experience of developing those neural connections, right? And what all the research shows is that your language development is actually slowed when you do that to kids. You know, in the short term, it looks like you've made a horrible mistake, you know, but in the long term, then learning is deeper, more comprehensive. They actually show improvements in school, but they've got to get through elementary school into middle school, and then the benefits really start to show up.
Yeah, once both starts to become natural like that. Hey, there's a great question in the Ask a Question section that I want to get to before we move on to your next principle. And Christina asks, given all the technology and information bits in our face 24/7, is there any research on impact to focus and the amount of content, the pace, and the variety that learners can tolerate?
That is a huge, great question. So you guys jump in, because there's people here that have information and knowledge about this, and I have opinions too. So the interesting thing about this, you know, we really know, based on how long you can maintain people's attention, that a learning segment shouldn't be more than about 10 minutes. You know, it used to be 15, but our attention spans are getting shorter, and we have to pay attention to cognitive overload too, Keith. Yeah. And what we are also seeing in some studies is that this next generation of learners, actually attention shifts much faster than my generation, because I'm a baby boomer. So it's we all know that we have the attention of a goldfish. Well, not quite, but almost. But what really is happening with the generation coming into the workforce now is that their ability to rapidly attention shift is much higher than previous generations. So they often multitask. It's not true multitasking, because they're not doing two things at the same time. They're shifting attention quickly from one thing to another. And that's why the experience is, we often look at that and go, they're totally distracted. But they actually are able to move more quickly between, pieces of information or stimulus. You know, watch my kids do homework, and they're often all on FaceTime together, listening to music, talking. I've got one kid that'll play a movie while she's doing her homework, and it's like, there's no way I could study with that going on. And for her, it helps her. So yeah.
You know what I heard, that when you do that, and when you kind of train yourself to be studying and learning, that you, in order to perform better, either during the testing or during the whatever the performance is, having that same music or having music playing at the same time helps you perform better, because it's replicating the environment that you were in when you were originally doing the studying.
Yeah,
and
that's interesting.
I had never thought of it that way, because I was one of those kids that liked listening to music, having it going when I was doing my homework and studying as well. But of course, when you go into the classroom, you don't have that. And so I always, I don't think that's the only thing, but it always struck me as, I wonder if you need to be studying, if you know you're going to be in a really super quiet environment when you're needing to perform, you should probably be practicing in that similar
Interesting.
environment.
Yeah. They're it's interesting too. They also know that one thing that helps you focus, concentrate, and retain information is chewing gum. Isn't that funny?
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, just the action of doing that while you're learning something improves your ability to hold on to that information. It's bizarre, but I'm looking at Learning Pirate says, yes, there are many studies being conducted by some of the top schools that are now identifying not only the way technology is having physical effects on the brain, but also psychological and cognitive ramifications as well. Yeah. And we banned chewing gum in schools. I did have my daughters had one enlightened teacher that let them chew gum during their tests. So the only one I found, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now those spinner things that they all hold in their hands these days.
Yeah. Hey, there's a news article that says listening to music hinders learning. So it's interesting. I have just a little thought that you've triggered here for me, Brent, was I took self-defense training, but back in my 30s, I got mugged a couple of times. And so I was like, okay, this is not going to happen to me again. So I took this powerful self-defense training, and they made sure that you learned how to protect yourself, but in an adrenaline state, because what they had realized was that a lot of people learn martial arts, but because they learn it when they're calm, when they get attacked and they go into high adrenaline, nothing comes, so they don't protect themselves.
They freeze.
They go into freeze. That's right. So this whole training was designed to put you in an adrenaline state and then teach you how to knock out your attacker. So I learned how to knock out my attacker in 2 blows, just so you know. And but it was all done in with these men that were padded and 12 feet tall and huge, and they would come after you, and you would have to protect yourself with strong blows in order to incapacitate them. And obviously they weren't literally incapacitated, but it was quite impressive. And I still know how to do that. So yeah.
So don't mess with Cynthia, people.
No. When you see me on the street, be kind. Yeah.
All right. Hey, before we run out of time, let's move on to that next principle here.
Yeah, the last one
I wanted. Favorite.
This is not someone at one of my web training sessions. He looks like he's falling asleep. Could you click the next image on this slide? So this is in the category of learn it, encode it, recall it, apply it. And one thing we know is sleep is critical to the encoding process. It's kind of interesting. And it's like, so what do you do with that? I saw that discussion about we could never use an elephant on a skateboard in our training session, and I bet you could never have people go to sleep either. So this is an important principle that we really want to start to think about. How do we help people bring sleep into what's happening? So if you go to the next slide, what's happening with sleep is that and click on, because it's animated, our waking brain encodes memories and our sleeping brain consolidates them. So what's happening when we sleep, and it could be an hour-and-a-half nap, or it could be that all-night sleep. What's happening is that we're leveraging slow wave sleep. We're leveraging the part of the sleep cycle that's in between the rapid eye movement sleep, where we dream. In slow wave sleep, our hippocampus is moving information into our neocortex. So that's where consolidation happens. And this is why I always wondered, the brain loves sleep when learning. It really does. So I always wondered why, when I crammed for tests in college, it didn't help. And I told my kids, go to bed. It's like, review your notes, go to bed, because your brain is gonna take everything that you were looking at and move that into long-term memory. That's gonna do a lot more for you than trying to stay up all night. Yeah. Yeah, my kids hate when I'm trying to learn at 5 a.m. Yes. So we can start to think about what is it we need to be doing to help our learners capitalize on the need for sleep. And that's why job aids are important and reinforcement tools are important. And we really want to talk with them about looking over those things before they go to bed that night. And there's one study that shows that the closer you learn something new to when you're going to go to sleep, the better. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, we talked about that the last time you were on. I did think that was fascinating, because everybody says that, the afternoon at the end of the day is a bad time for whatever reason, because everyone's on their post-lunch coma, food coma, and, mornings would be best, but then there's separations. So how do we apply that?
Well, I think we help with reinforcement tools personally, because I'm certainly not going to be able to give you a place to sleep during the day, and I don't want you sleeping during my session.
We should have nap rooms in every business, right? And right next to every classroom should be a nap room, and right after your training, you scheduled in an hour nap.
There's a, yeah, there you go, Christina. Break training up into small chunks over 2 to 3 days.
There you
So,
go.
don't try and cram them with information, but make sure it's spread out. There's time to integrate. Yeah, tell my boss I'm not napping, I'm learning. I'm just going to close my eyes and learn for a few minutes. So
Yes, I'm transferring this to long-term memory. I'll get back with you in the
I'll get
morning.
right back to you. Yeah, but I think it's sort of fun to contemplate. How do I help people leverage that? And right now I think it's by having explaining to people how their brains work, and then asking them to review at the end of the day, or right before they turn in, so that
Yeah.
they have a chance to take a look at it again. And we
Kara
support
has
them.
another great question in the Ask a Question section. What is your opinion of the forgetting curve and how to use that in retention strategies for virtual ILT?
Well, and the forgetting curve says that we will forget 90% of what we learned within a week of the experience, unless we have a reason to recall it. So I think, creating reinforcement experiences where and this is where spacing comes in as well, where we return to a concept, we enhance it, we elaborate on it, where we bring in a reason to remember something and apply it. All of that can be happening after a classroom experience, so that I think every learning design should have that built into it, that in that 1 week window where we will forget it unless we have a reason to remember it, that we give people creative, innovative, challenging reasons to revisit it, so that they want to do that, and they're rewarded for doing that.
Yeah, and that's part of our design that I think we need to think about from that blended perspective. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the virtual instructor-led software or that technology, but it's important from a design perspective that when you create a classroom experience or a virtual instructor-led classroom experience, that if you really do want to get people to remember what you taught in that you need to implement some sort of after the fact notification system or something that forces them to recall what they learned in it. So it's not something that you can do that's part of the instructor-led training, but it's something that you need to think about when designing your instructor-led training.
Yeah.
That it's got to follow. You have to follow it up with something afterwards that is going to get that recall happening. So
yeah. And then, so that's that recalling it and applying it, that part of the learning process, we go learn, encode, recall, apply, right? I think is pretty critical to the design, so that we start to think beyond the virtual classroom and think about the whole blended experience, from getting people ready to coming in and, having the information they need to be able to be effective, to applying it, to using it, and then to reinforcing it afterwards, so that we're using we're really leveraging the way our brains actually work so that we help people. Yeah.
Yeah, all good stuff. And you know what? We're reaching that 45-minute mark, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. Are there any final parting words you'd like to share with everyone?
Well, I did have 2 animated videos that are the first 6 engagement principles. If you've got those, we can send those out. And I think, like all of you, we're always trying to come up with new, creative, innovative ways to capture attention, to keep it engaging, keep it interactive, and then to think about, then what is it that I can do to help them retain it, apply it, and use it when they go back on the job. So I really appreciate you guys sharing some of your practices. These are 2, there you go. There's 2 links that'll take you out to our website. You're welcome to take a look at these brain-based principle videos. They're short. They're like 2 minutes long. My approach to microlearning is keep it short and use it to reinforce. So those are out there for you. Hey, thanks, Nathan.
Awesome. Cynthia, thank you so much for doing this with us today. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thank you guys for all the chatting you were doing there.
You guys are great. All right, I'm going to close out your video.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Yeah, I did drop that link in there. You can check out all her videos on her website, thenetspeedlearning.com. And I'm sure that you can get connected with Cynthia there as well. If you want to follow up, get some other questions answered, or dive a little bit more deeply, or if you want to engage with her in another way. Wow, the time is just flying by. We are rapidly approaching our fourth and final session that we'll be having with Cindy Huggett. Everybody, we're going to take a break here for about 10 minutes, but do not get distracted. Please come back at the top of the hour, and we will have Cindy Huggett ready in the hot seat in Crowdcast for this fourth session of the virtual instructor-led training playlist.